Hi everyone. Tonight, we journey back into a time when America was still wild, when its vast lands were untamed, and every winter tested the very meaning of endurance. Imagine stepping out into that frozen breath of early America, the 1700s frontier, where the air bites harder with every inhale, and the trees groan like living creatures under the weight of ice. You can almost feel it, the sting of cold slicing through the pines, the sharp scent of wood smoke hanging heavy in the air, and somewhere beyond that endless forest, a cabin stands alone, rough, handmade, and barely holding against the wind. The sky above glows with that steel blue shimmer that only winter brings. It's not a warning anymore. It's a promise. Winter has come, and for those living here 2 centuries ago, it could mean the difference between life and death. Before we step deeper into that frozen world, take a moment to settle in. If you enjoy these quiet journeys through history, do consider subscribing, and tell me where you're listening from, and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, and walk with me into the wilderness. The trail crunches beneath your boots, brittle leaves frozen into the earth like shards of glass. Behind you, smoke curls from a crooked chimney. Ahead, the forest thickens, ancient trees pressing close like sentinels, their branches heavy with frost. The air smells of pine resin, damp earth, and the faint sweetness of decay. Above, a murder of crows breaks the silence with sharp, echoing cries, as though warning that peace itself will soon vanish. This was the reality of the early frontier. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the wild heart of America offered hope, but no mercy. Men and women pushed west with wagons full of dreams and pockets full of inexperience. Most had never faced a winter without neighbors nearby or a market within reach. When the first frost came, it painted the land silver. Beautiful, yes, but also cruel. Roads froze solid. Streams turned to glass. And escape became impossible. You pull your cloak tighter, feeling the wind sneak through the seams. Think of those settlers, clearing forest land with stiff, frozen hands, racing to build shelter before nightfall. Some made it. Others didn't. Those who lingered too long found themselves trapped in half-finished cabins, buried under relentless snow. Historians still debate whether these pioneers underestimated the cold out of ignorance or pride, but the land was a harsh teacher. It taught quickly, and it punished slowly. As the season deepened, an eerie stillness settled over everything. The birds vanished. The rivers slowed to silence beneath a thin shell of ice. Even the air felt heavier, pressing down like an invisible weight. And in that silence, danger hid everywhere. For every quiet snowfall that seemed gentle and pure, there was a blizzard waiting, fierce enough to erase entire settlements from the map. You can almost hear it, the howl of the wind battering cabin walls, the distant cry of a wolf slipping through the cracks, the timber's long, low creak under a mountain of snow. The air itself seemed alive, clean, sharp, and merciless. Yet, amidst the terror, there was wonder too. The frost glittered on gloves like spun glass. Each breath steamed in the cold, glowing like ghostly light. The settlers often wrote about this strange duality, how winter was both sacred and savage, a season of death that somehow promised rebirth. One woman from the Pennsylvania frontier described it as, a silence so deep, even prayers seemed to freeze before reaching heaven. You can picture her now, tending a faint fire while her children sleep beneath quilts patched from worn-out fabric, whispering hope into the smoke. As days bled into weeks, color drained from the world. The forest turned monochrome. White, gray, black, as though nature itself had gone quiet to endure. The settlers no longer measured time by months, but by survival milestones, the last harvest, the first freeze, the first night the well water turned to ice. Each moment was a warning bell. Winter wasn't an event. It was a test. By December, life's rhythm had completely changed. Days shrank into hours of pale light. Every act, from chopping wood to boiling water, revolved around warmth and hunger. The human body adapted in quiet, brutal ways, skin cracked, faces burned red from the wind, movements grew slow and economical. Survival became a kind of discipline, a cold endurance that shaped the muscles, the mind, and even the soul. You can almost feel it in your own shoulders now, the ache of lifting logs, the sting of splitting ice to reach water. Fatigue was constant. But so was persistence. One small but fascinating detail rarely makes it into history books: the way settlers could predict the coming of deeper cold just by listening to the trees. On the coldest nights, the sap inside trunks froze and expanded until the wood cracked with a loud, echoing pop. They called it the forest's gunfire. It was nature's own warning, a reminder that even the trees were under siege. Historians still argue which winter was the cruelest: 1780, when the Hudson River froze solid and sea ice reached the Carolinas, or 1816, when volcanic ash from halfway across the world blotted out the sun, causing the year without a summer. But no matter which year you choose, the story sounds the same. Families huddled around dying fires, counting dwindling food, whispering prayers that spring would come before hunger claimed them. And here, standing in that imagined frost, you feel the truth beneath it all. The frontier wasn't built on heroism. It was built on habit. On small, quiet acts of endurance. Mending a boot, splitting another log, rationing another meal. It's easy to romanticize the wilderness from the warmth of modern life. But out there, every breath burned. Every mistake cost blood. You step back toward the cabin now, feeling the crunch of snow beneath your boots. The flakes fall soft and soundless, catching in your hair, melting on your skin. You pause at the door and glance toward the woods one last time. The snow keeps falling. The long winter has begun. Inside, the fire flickers weakly, not much, but enough to remind you that warmth still exists, if you're willing to fight for it. You close the door, and in that moment, you understand: from now until spring, every choice, every chore, every breath will be shaped by that relentless cold waiting just beyond these fragile walls. You wake to the faint creak of timber and the pale light of dawn leaking through cracks in the wall. The fire that had burned all night has collapsed into a dull orange glow, just embers now, breathing faintly in the hearth. Your breath fogs in front of you, each exhale rising and fading like a ghost in the chill air. You pull the wool blanket tighter around your shoulders and sit still for a moment, listening. The wind sighs outside, brushing snow from the roof, and in that quiet, you understand what every frontier settler came to realize: a cabin wasn't just a home. It was a shield. A fragile wall between life and death. The real work of survival began long before the first snow ever fell. Building a cabin on the American frontier wasn't a matter of comfort, it was an act of will. Every log, every cut of wood was a promise carved against the wilderness. You can almost see it now, springtime in the deep woods, when the air still carries the scent of rain and sap, and the land is soft enough to dig. A man stands with an axe in hand, striking rhythm into the valley. Each swing sends chips of pine and oak flying, the sound echoing off the hills like a drumbeat of defiance. Sweat runs down his back as he works from sunrise to sunset, knowing that the walls he raises in June will decide whether his family lives through January. Choosing the right place for that cabin was almost an art form. You had to read the land the way others read scripture, knowing where the sun would rise, where the winds would turn cruel, where water ran, and where it froze. Many frontiersmen built their homes on slight rises to keep floods away, facing south to catch what little winter sunlight they could. Too close to a stream meant danger when the thaw came. Too deep in the trees meant shadows, dampness, and endless cold. Historians still debate whether these choices came from European traditions or from what the settlers learned watching indigenous people, who had lived with the seasons for centuries. In truth, it was probably both, experience and desperation braided together. Once the spot was chosen, the race began. You needed 4 walls before frost, or you were finished. Many families built what they called half-faced camps first, crude shelters with 3 walls and a roof, just enough to keep off the rain while the real cabin took shape. The smell of fresh cut wood filled the air, sharp and alive, mingled with the steady rhythm of hammers and the murmur of tired voices. Each log was notched by hand, stacked and locked together with clay, mud, straw, or even hair mixed in, a crude paste they called chinking. It looked rough, but it held back the wind better than anything else they had. Inside, the walls were bare, the floors packed with earth, sometimes covered with animal hides to soften the cold ground. Nails were rare, so every joint had to fit with precision. A small gap in the wrong place could turn a warm cabin into a freezing tomb. When winter came, it found every weakness. A good home was measured by silence, no whistling drafts, no smoke seeping from the cracks. Only stillness, the kind that meant safety. A single fireplace, built from creek stones and lined with clay, served as the heart of the house. Flames hissed and danced, casting long shadows across the wooden walls. Yet, that same warmth came with danger. One careless spark could turn a winter refuge into an inferno. Many settlers saw their homes burn to the ground on the coldest nights, a cruel reminder that survival on the frontier always carried a price. Even the design of the chimney told stories of adaptation, some borrowed from Europe, others from native dwellings that allowed smoke to breathe upward through layers of clay and timber. Imagine the pride of finishing a roof just as the first snow began to fall, the sound of flakes striking the wood, soft and steady, a reward for months of unrelenting labor. But the work never really ended. Cabins were living things, they shifted, cracked, and sighed with the seasons. Each morning, the settlers walked the perimeter, running their hands along the seams, feeling for the cold fingers of air sneaking through. Each night, they listened, the wood expanding and contracting, creaking like an old creature settling into sleep. Over time, people said their homes spoke to them. One woman in Vermont wrote in her journal that she could predict the weather by her cabin's voice. A sharp snap in the beams meant the temperature would plunge, a low groan meant snow. To modern ears, it sounds poetic, but back then, it was practical. When your life depended on wood and fire, even the smallest sound became a language. Not all cabins were equal. Some settlers, craftsmen or wealthier families, built homes with lofts for sleeping, small windows sealed with oiled paper, and shutters to keep out the wind. Others lived in wooden boxes barely fit for shelter. You can imagine lying beside a smoking hearth, the draft creeping across your face, the cold finding every inch of you no matter how tightly you wrapped yourself. The walls might hold for a while, but the cold always found its way in. Still, people made beauty where they could. Bits of cloth were hung to cover cracks, not only to block the wind but to add a splash of color to the gray. Animal skulls decorated walls as trophies, or perhaps as talismans to keep evil spirits away. Bundles of dried herbs dangled from rafters, their scent a faint reminder of warmer months now buried beneath the snow. Historians still debate whether such customs were superstition, practicality, or something simpler, the human need to make even hardship feel like home. You step outside into that imagined morning. The snow glitters in the sunlight, so bright it almost hurts your eyes. The cabin stands behind you, small but proud, casting a long shadow across the frozen ground. You look at it, and it feels alive. A fragile victory carved against the wilderness. Inside, the fire catches again, whispering warmth back into the air. That warmth spreads slowly, through your fingers, across your chest, into your bones. The cabin holds. It breathes with you. And in that moment, surrounded by endless white, you understand what the settlers must have felt. Every log, every smear of clay, every stroke of the axe was a pact between them and the land. They would endure it, and in return, the land would let them stay. Outside, the forest waits, vast, silent, and patient as time itself. Inside, you stir the embers and listen to your home exhale. Night falls early in the frontier. By 4 in the afternoon, the horizon bleeds into violet and black, and the cold sharpens like a blade. The wind rises in low moans that slip through trees and rattle the shutters. In that darkness, the cabin becomes a lantern in an ocean of frost. The fire, glowing in the hearth, is more than warmth, it's memory, life, and prayer. Every frontier family treated the fire like a living member of the household. They fed it carefully, guarded it, spoke to it even, because if that flame ever died in the night, it could mean death before morning. Firewood wasn't just chopped, it was earned. Men spent long autumn days splitting oak, hickory, or birch into stacks as tall as themselves, their hands blistered and their axes dull from the strain. Each log held a promise: you will not freeze. Children learned to carry kindling before they could even walk straight, their small hands red from the cold. Inside, the rhythm of life revolved around the hearth. Meals were cooked, clothes dried, wounds tended, and stories told, all by firelight. That flicker painted the walls in gold and shadow, and in its dance, families saw comfort. They might have had little food, few possessions, but as long as that light burned, hope did too. Some settlers believed that a dying flame brought bad luck. If the fire dimmed, someone would whisper, "Don't let her sleep," and hurry to revive it with pine resin or dry moss. In some homes, coals were carried in iron pots between cabins so that no one would have to spark a new fire in the bitter cold. There's a kind of poetry in that image, neighbors walking through snow at midnight, carrying a small pot of glowing embers, shielding it from the wind like a newborn child. Because out there, in the heart of winter, fire wasn't just heat. It was the pulse of humanity. When storms came, they swallowed everything. You couldn't tell where the sky ended and the ground began. Snow piled against doors and windows, trapping families for days or even weeks. The sound of the wind became a language. It screamed, whispered, howled, and sang through the cracks, testing every inch of their shelter. There were moments of real fear, when the roof groaned under the weight of snow, or when the fire burned too low and smoke filled the cabin. Mothers wrapped their children in furs and prayed the walls would hold. Fathers sat awake through the night, staring into the embers, counting each breath of wind as if it might be their last. And yet, even in that silence, they endured. People found ways to make life bearable. A fiddle's soft tune might echo across the valley, or a mother's voice would tell stories of warmer lands. They sang songs, not for joy, but to remind themselves they still existed. It was in those endless nights that the true spirit of the frontier was forged. Not in battles or discoveries, but in quiet resilience, the courage to wait for dawn. When the snow finally eased, people ventured out again, faces hidden beneath scarves, boots crunching through the drifts. That first step into the cold light of day was always humbling. The world looked alien, familiar trees buried, fences vanished, the land sculpted into white waves. And yet, in that emptiness, community bloomed. Neighbors who lived miles apart made dangerous treks just to check on each other. A knock at the door in midwinter was both a miracle and a risk, because it could be a lost traveler, or a friend bringing food, or someone seeking shelter from the storm. In many places, hospitality wasn't kindness. It was law. You never turned a soul away in winter. Even enemies were given warmth for the night, because tomorrow, it might be you wandering in the cold. Those nights became the foundation of frontier fellowship. Around shared fires, people traded stories, news, and small luxuries, a piece of dried fruit, a new tool, a joke. Laughter sounded louder in the cold, echoing off the cabin walls like music. Children learned early that every face that appeared through the snow was a reminder, survival was never solitary. It was a shared burden, carried by hands that reached out in the dark. Winter was a teacher, harsh but fair. It taught patience, how to move slowly when every step could break through ice. It taught humility, how small humans truly were against the power of the land. And above all, it taught gratitude, for fire, for shelter, for one more sunrise. Frontiersmen and women passed those lessons down quietly. They didn't call themselves heroes or pioneers, they simply lived. Their journals rarely spoke of glory, only of the bitter wind, the sore hands, and the small mercy of light. And yet, in those words lies something sacred, proof that even when the earth froze solid, the human heart refused to do the same. You can almost picture it now. The final night of winter. The fire burns low, but not out. Outside, the snow begins to melt into trickling streams, whispering of spring. Inside the cabin, someone lifts their head and listens, birds, faint but real, singing somewhere beyond the trees. The frontier held its breath. Another winter survived. The people of that frozen age didn't just live through the cold, they became part of it. Their endurance carved the early rhythm of America, a heartbeat born in silence, fed by fire, and remembered in the warmth that still lives in every home built since. There comes a moment, quiet and almost invisible, when winter begins to loosen its grip. It doesn't happen with a storm or a sunrise, it begins with a sound. A single drop of water slipping from a roof, landing softly in the snow. Then another. And another. Soon, the silence that ruled for months starts to crack open, letting the rhythm of life whisper through again. The air shifts first, no longer a blade of ice, but something gentler. You can smell the thaw before you see it, the faint scent of wet earth buried beneath the drifts. Then the wind changes. It no longer howls, it sighs. For the settlers of the early American frontier, this was the moment they had been waiting for, proof that the land had forgiven them for surviving. The snow that once sealed their doors begins to sink and soften. Water trickles along the frozen paths, cutting small veins through the white. Smoke still curls from chimneys, but now it smells of celebration, not desperation. Inside the cabins, life stirs. The same hands that once chopped endless would now open windows to let the first week light creep in. Blankets are shaken out. Boots are set by the door. Children laugh for the first time in weeks, chasing each other through slush and mud, their breath fogging the air like little ghosts of joy. Every year, this thaw was both miracle and warning. The melting snow revealed what winter had hidden, broken fences, dead livestock, the toll of survival. But even in loss, there was gratitude. Because every family that stood beneath the spring sky had won a battle the land itself had designed to break them. Spring didn't mean rest. The settlers knew that as soon as the ground softened, the race began anew. They had to plant before the next frost, mend roofs, rebuild barns, and hunt the last stores of winter meat before it spoiled. And yet, even in that backbreaking labor, there was a sense of quiet triumph. Every seed pressed into the soil was a declaration, we're still here. The rivers that once froze into mirrors now roared with melted snow, their sound echoing through the valleys. Men fished again. Women gathered herbs pushing through the thawing ground. Children carried buckets of water and fed the animals that had made it through. Nature seemed to sigh with them, as if both human and earth exhaled the same breath after months of holding it in. For a few fleeting weeks, the frontier felt alive again. Birds returned to the trees. Wolves called from the ridges. The forest floor turned green beneath the dripping pines. And at night, when the fire burned low and the stars returned, families sat outside their cabins for the first time in months. They didn't speak much. When historians look back, they often tell the story of the frontier through wars, treaties, and exploration. But the real story, the quiet one, was written in those winters. It was written in frostbitten fingers that refused to stop working, in the mothers who kept the fires alive, in the children who learned courage before they learned to read. Each thaw was a new beginning, but it also carried memory. The land never forgot, and neither did the people. They remembered the neighbors they lost, the animals that didn't make it, the hunger that nearly consumed them. And yet, they also remembered the laughter, the small kindnesses, the way the firelight danced on a loved one's face. In time, those memories became stories. Stories passed around the hearths of newer homes, told to grandchildren who would never know what it meant to live through the kind of cold that silenced the world. And still, every time winter returned, people prepared the same way, with hands, hope, and the same faith that had carried their ancestors through. The frontier may have changed. The cabins are gone now, replaced by roads, towns, and electric lights that never dim. But if you walk into the woods on a clear winter night, you can still feel it, that pulse beneath the frost, the echo of lives once lived by the glow of a single flame. The cold wind that brushes your face carries whispers from those long-ago winters, not of fear, but of endurance. It says, "You are the children of survival." For every modern home standing warm in the snow, there was once a cabin of rough logs and raw courage. For every comfort we have now, there was once a hand that bled splitting wood in the dark. The settlers didn't just survive winter, they transformed it. They turned hardship into heritage, endurance into identity. Their struggle carved something deep into the American spirit, the belief that even the harshest season can be endured if you hold on to warmth, to faith, and to each other. The thaw came and went, but its memory stayed behind, not just in the land, but in the people. Generations passed, and with them, the raw terror of the frontier faded into history. But something else remained, something quieter and stronger, a kind of endurance written deep into the American heart. They called it resilience. But back then, it was simply living. The descendants of those early settlers would go on to build towns, railroads, and cities. They would send their children to schools, raise new families, and trade the creak of wooden cabins for the hum of new machines. Yet every winter, when frost began to bite at the glass and wind sang through the trees, something ancient stirred within them, a whisper that said, "You've been here before." It was in their habits, the way they stacked firewood before the cold, the way they salted food, the way they lit candles when storms cut power. These were not just chores. They were echoes, small rituals carried from the edge of survival into the modern age. Even now, in the warmth of our homes, surrounded by walls that no wind can pierce, we still chase the same comfort they once fought for, the glow of light in a dark world. Every culture has its symbol of endurance. For the frontier, it was fire. Not the roaring flame of conquest, but the humble ember, the one that burns quietly, faithfully, through the longest night. In every cabin, that ember meant life. And in a way, it still does. Because every story we tell, every moment we remember, every act of kindness in a world that can often feel cold, they are all forms of fire. That's what the frontier truly gave us, not the myth of rugged heroes, but the truth of ordinary people who built hope out of hardship. A mother tending the flame while her children slept. A man mending his roof under a sky that threatened snow. A neighbor walking miles through the dark to bring bread or kindling. These weren't grand gestures. They were simple acts of humanity, but in the heart of winter, simple things become sacred. If you walk through the old valleys where those cabins once stood, you'll find almost nothing left. The logs have long rotted, the hearthstones buried under moss and leaves. But if you listen, really listen, the land still remembers. The rivers still run where they once fetched water. The wind still moves through the same trees that sheltered their roofs. And when the snow falls, blanketing everything in white silence, it feels as though the earth itself is honoring them, wrapping their memory in peace. Historians can write dates and names, but the land tells its own story, one of survival, silence, and grace. Every flake that falls, every ember that glows, is a chapter of that story still being told. What those settlers learned, and what they left us, is that the cold never truly ends. It changes form. Today, our winters are different. The storms we face are not always made of snow or ice. They can be loneliness, loss, uncertainty, the invisible chills of modern life. And yet, the same truth remains, survival still depends on warmth. Not just the warmth of fire, but of connection, of voices, hands, and hearts that refuse to let each other freeze. That is the real legacy of the American frontier. They taught us that no matter how dark or endless the winter may seem, spring will come, and until it does, we keep the fire burning. So tonight, when you stand by your window and see the frost glitter under the moonlight, think of them, those quiet, forgotten souls who once stood under the same sky, breathing the same cold air, whispering the same prayers. They didn't have much. But they had enough courage, enough love, enough hope to keep a single flame alive through the longest winter. And that was how the early American frontier survived the freezing winters, not through power or pride, but through quiet courage, patience, and the fire they carried within. Every ember that glowed inside those rough cabins wasn't just warmth. It was hope, endurance, and the spirit of survival that still lives in us today. If this story touched you, take a moment to let me know what you felt while listening. I'd love to read your thoughts down in the comments. And if you'd like to travel with me through more untold stories of human resilience, remember to subscribe and keep that small flame of curiosity alive. This is Lyfory, where every story reminds us that even in the coldest winters of history, the human heart never stops burning.